Phil, man, it is
Adam,
so good to have you here. Thank you
great to
so
be
much
here,
for
buddy.
visiting with us today. So, I don't like to give introductions to people because I want you to be able to share with the world who you are
Love it.
and tell people what you want them to know about you.
Adam, it's awesome to be here and glad that we can have this conversation. The best way for me to answer that is just to say, I've been in Oklahoma now 26 years. In fact,
Mm,
October made my 26th month anniversary of living in Oklahoma. It was never my intention. I say that to people all the time. In 1997, nobody wakes up and say, I want to move to Oklahoma. That's not what was on people's mind. It was going to be a resume bump for me. Let me
mm,
work here a couple years. My best friend in college lived here. That's kind of like the connection.
sure.
And got here, and I had a 2-year plan, and I was going to go back to Ohio, where I'm originally from.
Mm,
26 years later,
mm.
family, wife, children, engaged in community. Oklahoma became embedded in me as I became embedded in Oklahoma.
Before we, touch on anything else, though,
Mhm.
I want to take a step back
Sure.
and I want you to talk about Greenwood Rising.
Yes, sir.
I've been to Greenwood Rising, I think 4 or 5 times now. I've taken different groups of people.
Mhm.
It is a life altering experience, in my opinion. I am amongst the people you mentioned who I went to Oklahoma history class. I took that in high school. I lived in the state for 20 plus years. But up until a few years ago, I didn't even know anything about the history of Greenwood, Black Wall Street. And then once I started to learn on my own, my understanding was elevated and really brought to life by visiting Greenwood Rising. And as difficult, and I tell people it's not an easy experience,
Mhm.
but it's a necessary one.
Yeah.
So, how did you end up getting involved with Greenwood Rising? And more importantly, what does Greenwood Rising as a not just a museum, but an experience to tell the story of Black Wall Street, what does that mean to you? And what does that mean to other Oklahomans, you think?
The first thing that I'll come out the gate and say is Black history is American history.
Yes. Yes.
And the sooner that Americans embrace that,
Mm.
the sooner we'll get to a day that Hannibal B. Johnson, who's my mentor and great friend, and he was the lead curator for Greenwood Rising,
Mm.
he's written for many years. I can't wait till the day that we don't have a Black History Month.
Yes.
That
Yes.
Black history is so embedded in our teaching and in our
Mm-hmm.
culture that it's just a part of everyday life and
Right.
history. But when Greenwood Rising, as we were getting closer and closer to opening, it was obvious, very soon obvious, that this place was going to be and I hate to use a overused term, but a game changer
Mm. Mm.
on how people can come into a facility with a preconceived mindset.
Right.
Because
Right.
people go in and they think, okay, I'm going to this museum that's talking about this massacre, this race
Mm-hmm.
massacre. So you already go in with this mindset that you're about to be sad and a lot of people got killed and let me learn more about it in the history. But that story is just one piece. It's
Sure.
one small piece.
Sure.
We know about Killers of the Flower Moon. People are
Right.
learning about that history now.
Right.
And that land didn't care what color you were. If you had that land, you had that money and wealth. And then the rise of the hate of that. The rise
Mm.
of the Ku Klux Klan, 1915, Birth of a Nation comes out. And if we don't do something, if
Mm-hmm.
we don't stand up, black folks being millionaires and Native
Right.
Americans being millionaires and they're living better lives than we are. This is not
Right.
should be. And that mindset, that jealousy, that anger, that hate rose up.
Mm.
I had I mentioned the movie because a month before we opened up, during the filming in Pawhuska, I got a phone call and they said, we have some VIP in town. They want to come to the
Oh
museum,
wow.
want to see it. And I said, sure, because I would get that all the time.
Sure.
But they didn't tell me who it was. And
Mm.
about 30 minutes before they pulled up, they texted and said, by the way, um, it's Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro.
Wow.
Please treat them well.
Wow.
And so they step out the car, plain clothes. You wouldn't even know it was them.
Mm.
And their handlers come up and say, they only have 30 minutes. Please take them through quickly. We're shooting in the morning. We got to get them back to Pawhuska.
Sure.
And so I'm being, oh, of course, no problem. but I know it's about to happen because it happens to everybody.
They can't do it in 30
You're
minutes.
mesmerized.
Yeah.
You are in there. And of course, they start in the first exhibit. Robert De Niro says, he said, wait a minute. I will never forget this. He stops and said, wait a minute. You're telling me Indians owned slaves? And so we explained, yes, sir, gave him the history. And he said, why am I just now hearing this? We get to the very end. They're standing. It's 2.5 hours later, by the way.
Wow.
They're so
Wow.
mesmerized. They start talking about a particular scene in the movie in which, because, that occurred 1919, 1920, 1921, the same time period. So they're going over this scene, and when you walk in the room and you ask me this question, and I respond, he said, we should put this history in the movie.
Wow.
And they stop and they look at me and said, it's okay if we put this in the movie, right? And I was like, these two are asking me what to put in the movie.
Wow.
And I remember saying, gentlemen, whatever you put in the movie that has historical basis and accuracy can only give it more credibility.
Wow.
So I still haven't been to see the movie, but people have told me there is a scene where they talk about the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre.
This
and it's
is
a scene in the movie. And so
I can't believe
so when people
this. Like,
say,
really?
how does the museum impact people?
Yeah.
Well, tell you what, go see the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, and you can understand that movie impacted them so much. They went back and had the writers and had the directors make sure they wove in that history into the movie while they're making the movie.
Wow.
That's the impact that it had. You don't leave with this sense of, oh my gosh, you leave with this sense of purpose. I have been given this information. I understand how incredible the lives these people were, that they built this. It was destroyed by hate. Their resilience rebuilt it back. And you leave there with, how do I take this story and live my life out in a different way to support history? Let's learn history. The good, the bad, and ugly. So when you have House Bill 1775, when you have things in Florida trying to make a silver lining over slavery, black people did learn something from slavery, and the way that they want to take history and whitewash it, or let's not talk about that. We don't need to talk about that anymore. And Martin Luther King said, a group of people who forget their past are destined to repeat it.
Give us your take. What is your perspective on where we are and where we're headed, and maybe what we need to do to make sure things go in the right direction?
I've actually been having these conversations probably the last 3 or 4 months with staff, with different donors, with different people at different places to say, to basically say that we are, and I don't ever say these words lightly, we are at a precipice. Socially, politically, in the United States of America, as we come into 2024, anybody who is doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, who's doing the work of CARE, who's doing the work of OCCJ, anybody in that realm, they are going to be utilized, and I use this phrase because people would understand it, as a political piñata. Just going to beat up on us. They're going to beat it. And even here in Oklahoma, there are, unfortunately, state representatives that have sat in public meetings and have made statements like, quote, diversity, equity, and inclusion work is demonic, unquote.
Oh, my goodness.
So companies and organizations that have shareholders to be beholden to and, and understand, they want to lean in, but if we're going to be challenged and pushed back because we decide to help out CARE, or we decide to give a grant to OCCJ, or we have a state superintendent who basically will attack you if you do any work related to D&I, people are going to do what people are going to do. They're going to shrink back. So that's, I believe, where we are. And where we get to is to do more of the work that we've already been doing, but we have to elevate it. If we allow the politics of 2024 to gain traction, I would say we are in trouble. We will there will be so much of a momentum against us that what we have to stand with is going to be so tremendous, so tremendous to overcome. We have to unify. Our work going forward, the future of America is, as oversimplistic as it sounds, the unifying of our separate communities to say there are more people standing on our side
Right.
than there are those that are standing with bullhorns on that side. But they've got to hear us. They have
Yes.
got to see us.
Yes.
And they've got to see that, yes, I cannot sit back and watch this. I've got to be involved with it.
That's powerful. I I agree 100%. And I have so many thoughts running through my mind right now just because that's in my nature, right? As I hear that and I'm like, yes, what can I do to get involved? And I think that brings me to this point is that what people need to understand, in the words of Ibram X. Kendi, who, incredible author and speaker on issues related to race and racism in America. And his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is you're either racist or you're actively anti-racist. But to be other than actively anti-racist, you are complicit in racism.
Yes.
And I think that's the message people need to get, is that there is no sitting on the sidelines and watching. And that's what we've been suffering from for far too long in America. We all have to come together and kind of just give everyone a wake-up call. Be that cup of coffee that perks people up to realize that you can be involved, and you have to be that somebody, because the silent majority is what we need to be more involved and voice their opinions, because I think there's a lot of good people in America. I believe there's a lot of good people in Oklahoma.
Totally agree.
That's why I'm
agree.
so dedicated to this work.
Yes.
However, getting them to have the courage, the tools, and the knowledge necessary to speak up is, I think, the role that we play.
Man, I love it.
Phil,
Adam,
thank you so much.
thank you.
It's been a real pleasure, and I hope that, more people, get to know about you and get to know, more importantly, about the work of OCCJ. Because, as I always say, those of us in these positions, we're not in it so that people can know who Adam Soltani or Phil Armstrong is, but we're about building institutions so that those institutions live beyond the leaders who lead them.
Yes. Love it.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, man.